Hi folks, Wooden Boat Dan here. Just wanted to give you a heads up. The podcast you're about to listen to was recorded several years ago, so some of the phone numbers, email addresses, website links, and time-sensitive information are no longer valid. Please keep that in mind as you listen. If you'd like to contact me, my email address is woodenboatdan@gmail.com. Thank you and enjoy the podcast. Welcome to Hooked on Wooden Boats weekly podcast episode number 129. I am your host, Dan Matson, aka Wooden Boat Dan. If you can't do it, well, there might be somebody who can, sort of. And this is the world's first podcast fully dedicated to celebrating the art, craft, history, tradition, and romance of wooden vessels around the globe. Thanks for tuning in today, folks. This is actually a bi-weekly podcast right now for the near future, and I'm glad to have you on board for the show today. We've got some fun planned as usual. Sitting in my international headquarters in Stanwood, Washington, looking out on a balmy 49-degree day with rain. Oh, we've had some pretty decent weather lately. We've had some sunshine and temperatures approaching 70 degrees. So there is hope here in the Northwest that spring and summer are around the corner. So stay tuned for that. Well, not a whole lot new to report here. I am frantically working on my two-car garage to get a shop space set up there. I've also started selling stuff on Amazon, so that's taking part of my workspace up. So I'm kind of juggling the two things, woodworking versus Amazon business. I wish I had like a 4-car garage with a temporary wall, but I don't, so I've got to make this work, and I got pretty creative with some things like my bicycles that I've got hooks in the ceiling so they hang down vertically, but then I made an additional third hook so that the bikes actually, once I hang them on the double hooks, and I lift up the handlebar side so that they hang parallel to the ceiling by a third hook. So that gets them from hanging in my face, because it's a 9-foot ceiling. They hang down 4 feet, which only leaves 5 feet, which isn't enough for me. I'm 6'2", used to be 6'3". So I'm getting creative with some things like that, but I am getting organized. My boats are sitting outside, covered up in the rain and the sun, waiting to be tenderly pulled into the garage and worked on at some point here in the near future. So I will keep you posted on my endeavors there. We have a new subscriber to the Hooked on Wooden Boats newsletter, e-newsletter, Todd Rosine. Todd, thanks for joining the list. We've got over 600 subscribers now, which is pretty awesome. And it's a monthly newsletter that I send out with news about Hooked on Wooden Boats and the wooden boat world, and I have some resources and links and fun things. So if you'd like to subscribe to that, it is free, and you can go to hookedonwoodenboats.com/subscribe and give me a couple pieces of information, and you're good to go. I also do want to mention, I haven't mentioned this for a while, that there's a couple books for sale that you can access from my website. One of the books is one I wrote called Get in the Wooden Boat Game, a guide for building your first boat. It's available on my website in a electronic book version. You can buy it there for $4.99. And also, if you're interested in the Kindle version of that, it is on Amazon. If you just go to Amazon Kindle book section and put in Get in the Wooden Boat Game, that'll come up, and it's available as a Kindle version for $5.99. And then also I have Russell Brown's book on my site. It's a book about epoxy basics, working cleanly and safely with epoxy. Got a lot of great tips and tricks in it. And so if you go to my homepage, hookedonwoodenboats.com, you click on Russell's book there on the right-hand side. That'll take you to a page where you can make a purchase of that book also. I believe that book's $5.99, and it's a really good book. I've read it and applied some of the principles, and Russell knows what he's doing. So check those out if you get a chance. Today's featured segment, which I forgot to announce earlier in the show, is with Pete Leenhouts. Pete is the executive director of the Northwest School of Wooden Boat Building in Port Hadlock, Washington. I first met Pete in 2012. I had been to the boat school one time and had interviewed the previous executive director. And then somehow Pete found out about my podcast. He wrote me a long email, invited me over. I came over. He took me out to lunch. He's just been very gracious and kind. And so I've spent quite a bit of time at the boat school over the last year and a half, doing interviews, hanging out, and so on, which has been really cool. So I emailed Pete a couple weeks ago and said, hey, Pete, let's do a phone interview. We haven't talked for a while. I've only interviewed Pete one time for the podcast. That was back in 2012. I think it was May 2012. We did a short interview, but this interview is a more full interview. And Pete tells his story of being in the Navy, retired Navy captain, and how he ended up at the boat school and why he's passionate about what he does. It's really a lot of fun. Pete's a really passionate, hardworking guy. Really doing great things at the boat school, and they're spreading their mission of keeping the traditions of wooden boat building alive and well. And they've got students from all over the world, so stick around for that interview. I think you're going to like it. Okay, we're going to move right into the interview now with Pete Leenhouts of the Northwest School of Wooden Boat Building. So take it away, Pete. Okay, it's April 8th, 2014. I am on the phone with Pete Leenhouts. Pete, where do you live?
I live in Port Ludlow, but I work at the school in Port Hadlock.
Right, okay, so I didn't think you lived in Port Hadlock, but Pete Leenhouts in Port Ludlow, who's the director of the Northwest School of Wooden Boat Building. Pete, welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks very much, Dan. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's been almost 2 years since we did any kind of an interview. I think it was at the Pocket Yacht Palooza a couple years ago. We chatted a little bit.
Time flies.
Yeah, it was a long time ago. I haven't talked to you for a while, so I thought it'd be fun to catch up and see what's happening.
Sure. Yeah.
Pete, let's just review some couple things here. Tell me about your youth. Did you grow up in Wisconsin? Is that right?
Yes, I grew up in the country outside Waukesha, Wisconsin, which is about 15 or 20 miles, maybe a little farther than that, west of Milwaukee, about halfway between Milwaukee and Madison. A true Wisconsinite would say Milwaukee, not Milwaukee.
Did you do any boating as a kid, Pete?
Just rowboats and flat-bottom skiffs on fishing lakes, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Sailed an Escal one time at a YMCA camp, that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Did it get in your blood at that age, or was it later?
Not really. It was later. Actually, I had a 27-year career in the Navy as an active-duty surface officer, and one of the most fortunate experiences I had was commanding a wooden minesweeper, the USS Pledge, an ocean minesweeper, an MSO built in Tacoma in 1955, which was one of the pinnacles of Navy woodworking when those ships were built. And the book on Navy woodworking as shipbuilding was written around those boats. I commanded the Pledge from 1990 to 1992 while she was stationed in Seattle, and we were taken care of by the Lake Union Dry Dock and Shipbuilding Corporation on Lake Union, or LUD, and I observed very closely, as commanding officers will, how the ship was taken care of by professionals, and these guys gave us an absolutely superlative level of support. They actually felt that the ship belonged to them and that we were only renting it from them in between short yard periods. So
really,
I really enjoyed that relationship with those professionals and shipwrights, and thought, this might be really interesting to get into at some point after I retired. And 12 years later, in 2004, I retired and worked for a defense contractor in the Washington, D.C. area for a year. And at the end of that year, found myself standing in my office looking out over the trees and thinking, I really need to be in boat school, learning how to build wooden boats. So that's what I did. My wife and I sold our house, put our kids in college, moved west, and joined the student body of the Northwest School of Wooden Boat Building in 2005.
Wow, that's amazing. Let's back up for a second, Pete. That minesweeper was built in Tacoma, is that what you said?
Yeah, But it was built in Tacoma by the J.M. Martinek Shipbuilding Corporation in 1955.
And what size was that boat?
It was 175 feet long. I'm looking at a picture of it by Bob Hitz, who was a marine artist, I think now retired in Seattle, a superlative artist. 175 feet long, an active duty crew of 55, and a reserve crew of about 26 or 27, all men at that time.
Was that Carvel planked, Pete?
Yes.
Uh-huh.
Triple planked.
Triple planked. And what was the wood that was used on that, the species?
I want to say it was oak and juniper, but that is faded a little bit. I don't remember exactly what the hull was constructed of. Extremely tough. We took great care not to bounce the ship off the pier too many times, but it was very resilient. And
now, was the deck
all wood, not fiberglass. The MCMs, which are a bigger class of Navy mine countermeasure ships, or MCMs, were being commissioned in the 90s when I had command of Pledge, which was a much older ship. Those ships were also constructed of wood, but a composite material, and they were surfaced with fiberglass. The Pledge was a true wooden ship, not a composite wood ship.
Now, was the deck in the house on that boat also wood, Pete?
Yes, the superstructure was all plywood, marine plywood with fiberglass surface, and the deck was a true laid deck, caulked and everything.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And there's a reason they built those out of wood, right?
Yes, the Navy's experience with mines in the 1950 to 1953 Korean War was not very positive. We lost a significant number of ships and men to mines laid by the Russians in North Korean ports. And so the ships that had been originally built during World War II to work against mines were steel ships, and magnetic mines had come into operation then in quite wide numbers, and we lost many ships to contact mines, which bumped up against the ships all into magnetic mines. And so the MSO class was designed and built in the 1950s. I believe the first ships were commissioned in 1952, and the last ships were commissioned in 1956, I believe. I'm stretching my memory a bit here, to be non-magnetic. And so the engines on those ships were aluminum block Packard diesel engines. The generator engines were steel block. The ship was ringed with large cables to make the ship neutrally magnetic, so that it was essentially a stealth ship invisible to the mines. And it carried all kinds of active acoustic and contact detonating mine countermeasures capabilities on the ship. Very capable ships.
Yeah. So where, in your time on that ship, where were you at? Were we all over the place, Pete?
We were stationed in Seattle at Pier 90, along with two sister ships, the Conquest and the Enhance. There were two more ships down at Tacoma. Implicit was one of them, another excellent ship. And we were here largely to protect the sea lanes coming in and out of the Puget Sound in case of a war with the Russians or anybody else that wanted to take us on. We expected that our sea lanes would be mined, because mines are extremely effective weapons against surface ships and submarines, and also very cheap. So the enemy has a lot of them. Lots of enemies have lots of them. And we spent lots of time in the Puget Sound operating our mine countermeasures equipment, practicing under every kind of operational restrictions possible to make sure that we knew what we were doing and were very well trained. We also went up and down the coast as far down as San Diego. Before I got to the ship, they had the Mine Countermeasure Squadron, which was based at that time in Sandpoint on Lake Washington, had actually made a trip up to Alaska and had stopped at ports up in Alaska and on the Canadian Pacific coast. So these are actually ocean-going minesweepers. The Pledge, for example, spent quite a bit of time in Vietnam during the Vietnam War, engaged in Operation Market Time, where they would stop junks and sampans to check for contraband material on enemy troops. They were all over the world, basically. These ships went everywhere. Because they had a 12-foot draft, they could get into almost every port in the world, and the Navy used them to show the flag quite a bit.
Wow. Now, are any of those ships still active, Pete?
Not in our Navy. There is, my understanding is there's one ship in Belgium, which is a museum ship. There's a couple of hulks left in the U.S., and I've lost touch of where they are. And the Pledge, after being decommissioned in 1994, spent a few years over in Bremerton in the inactive ship section, and then was bought by the Taiwanese along with two sister ships and sent to Taiwan. And the last time I checked, which was several years ago now, she was on active duty there.
Oh, okay. So does the U.S. doing any minesweeping these days?
My data is somewhat dated at this point since I haven't focused on that. But
yeah,
it's my understanding that we have MCMs, mine countermeasure ships, which are about 1,000 tons, maybe a little bit more, stationed in Sasebo. The Guardian, you might recall, the ship that went aground in the Philippines, was one of those ships. There are also mine countermeasure ships stationed, I believe, in Bahrain for keeping the sea lanes in the Persian Gulf free of mines.
Yeah, interesting. So that's when you got the bug, and you got out of the Navy and did some consulting, or took a job in D.C. and then moved to Port Hadlock to go to school, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah. What was that experience like for you, Pete, going to the school there?
Well, it was pretty exciting, actually, because it was something completely different than I'd done before. It'd been a while since I'd been a student, and certainly hadn't had, although I'd had a shop in the Navy and had followed me around, from duty station to duty station, I'd never had to work to somebody else's standards in a shop. And so, as I tell visitors to the school these days, it was quite an education the first 3 months, having to unlearn about half the bad habits that I'd learned myself over the previous 25 years, and then learning how to work quickly and safely in a shop using hand tools, which we were focused on for the first 3 or 4 months of the class. My first year, I started in 2005 in October, and we're taught, as we teach now, the first 3 months is basically hand tool exercises to make sure that everybody knows how to use all the tools, keep them sharp, make a variety of different things which are of advantage to boat builders. Go through a drafting course, a lofting course, and a skiff building course, and you're boat building by early December, starting in October. And then I went and took the contemporary wood composite program the first year, and completed that course in June. The following January started traditional small craft, which is a traditional boat building course. Finished that course in June and followed it with a repair course. And then the following January started traditional large craft, and finished that course in the following June. So heel to toe, basically, for the 3 courses.
I see. So, Pete, when you went to the school, what was your purpose? I'm just curious what you were thinking.
Well, I think it's possible to learn wooden boat building outside schools, for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, schools are a relatively recent phenomenon,
Yeah.
But when I started the course, I was roughly 51 years old, and I'd had a full career in the service. And I knew that it would take me 20 years to master, become where I felt I was at least competent in the trade. And I felt that I needed to go to a professional school to learn the trade as quickly as I possibly could, with people who are professionals both in the trade and in the teaching world. And I found that in spades at the school. I enjoyed the experience. We built a significant number of boats. We've stayed in touch. Believe it or not, the owners like to come back and tell us what's going on with their boats. The students generally stay in touch with each other, not always, but in my classes they did. I respect the instructors immensely for their professional experience. It was all around a very positive experience for me. I had thoughts at the time of starting my own boat building company, and I worked a little bit, very small amount professionally, and got mixed up in some family issues. I did quite a bit of traveling for a while, back and forth to Wisconsin and back here, and then got into the board, and then kind of got tracked into the administrative world. So I'm boat building myself in my shop in my garage here in Port Ludlow, and mostly working administratively and running the school and managing all the myriad fascinating things that we do there.
So tell me what you're working on right now personally on your boat, Pete.
Well, I'm actually working on a Bolger Clam skiff, which is an 18-foot-long Sharpie-style skiff that was designed by Philip Bolger, the naval architect who worked out of Gloucester, Massachusetts for many years before his death a few years ago. A really innovative, uniquely insightful naval architect who came up with something on the order of 850 or 860 designs over his long career, which started in the late 1940s. And it's a flat-bottom boat with a center console, an outboard engine. A friend of mine down the road here has one, which he uses all summer long for clamming and crabbing and fishing and that kind of thing. Very capable boat. Doesn't take a very large engine to drive. Very stable. Immense capacity for carrying a load and for a good stability. So that's why I liked it.
Yeah. And so how much you got left to do on that, Pete?
Well,
I'm not asking with a dig there, because I know you've been working on it for a while.
You know the answer, of course. I started that boat in 2009.
Okay.
I hate to admit, but it's true. And this is a boat that you're supposed to be able to build in a month of weekends. And so, of course, I'm putting all the gloss on it. Everything is trying to be perfect, although it isn't, and that kind of thing. And, of course, once I got into board activities and then on to administering in the school, my time available to work on things fell to zero practically for a couple of years. So I'm just now getting back to it after a 6-month break. My brother, for whom I'm building the boat, is wondering if he's ever going to see it. But I am working on the aft storage compartments and aft seats at the present time. So I'm getting pretty close, and it is three-dimensional. It does look like a boat.
Yeah. Is that a lapstrake boat, Pete, or a...
Oh, no, it's plywood.
Plywood,
it's marine
okay.
Plywood, yeah. So in Bolger is quite famous for what's sometimes referred to as a Bolger brick, which means it's a boat that has a rectangular center section, and then the bow is pulled in at the front of the boat, of course. And in a Sharpie boat, the bow comes up out of the water, so the bottom is just a flat piece of plywood that rises as it comes forward. And the boat is designed to run on its bottom with the stem out of the water for maximum stability. To my eyes, it's actually a pretty good-looking small skiff. It's 18 feet long, can be driven with a 40-horse outboard, and runs with practically no wake. A tank of gas will take you all day, to burn, that kind of thing.
Yeah, so it's got some design commonalities, I don't know if that's a word, with dories in probably, doesn't it? With a flat bottom like that? And
it's a rockered bottom.
Yeah.
It does have a flat exit, where the water comes off at the transom. But Bolger was really a uniquely innovative naval architect and really knew his stuff. And so his boats are really designed for function first and shape second, for the visual look of it. I like most of his boats, and so I don't have any problem emphasizing the fact that he designed some really interesting, unique boats. Other boats that he designed, for example, the Bolger Micro AS-29, which means Advanced Sharpie 29-foot long boat, or Advanced Sharpie 39, and dozens of other boats. He also built, for example, or designed rather, the ship that was used in Master and Commander, the HMS Rose, and which is modeled after a British frigate.
Really?
Yeah, the traditionally built. I don't remember if the height of the gun deck is a traditional, but I'm pretty sure that it is. It was built before all the current regulations went in to make those ships difficult. It's not impossible to build in the U.S. today.
Yeah.
All kinds of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
We have a design that we had considered building this year called the Fisherman 18, which could be built either traditional Carvel or lapstrake or in marine plywood, and we'd been thinking about building it cold molded, but we had a commission come in, and so we opted for the commission instead.
Very cool.
Just a wide range of interesting boats.
Yeah, very fun. So, Pete, give me an update on the school. What's been happening this school year and what the future's looking like?
Well, we're in Port Hadlock, which is about 10 miles south of Port Townsend. We're in our 33rd year of operation. We have a staff of 9, 5 instructors and 4 staff members, 4 administrative staff members. And we have 45 students, started with 53 this year, and we're building something on the order of 18 boats, if you count all the small skiffs that we started and finished back in December. So there's quite a range of boats that are being built. We have 3 programs in operation now running simultaneously. A traditional large craft, which we're building a Carvel plank boat called a Chamberlain 36. The name of the boat is Sea Beast. We built a similar boat back in 2006 and 2007, It's a 70%, 30%, 70% engine, 30% sail motor sailor. So it's our large craft. We're building a 28-foot small cruising tug called a Hanson Forest Service Boat. We're building a John Hacker designed 1935 speedboat called a Hacker 21 Special. And that's our large craft program. So the students in there have their hands full, and they're building an incredible range of interesting boats. In the traditional small craft program, the students are building 5 boats, and probably the widest range of boats actually is in that particular shop under the direction of Jeff Hammond, our senior instructor. We're building a 21-foot Carolina skiff that was originally designed on Harker's Island in the Outer Banks in 1903. We're building a 12-foot double-ended Davis boat, the first one to be built in probably 50 or 60 years, from a design that we found in a garden down in Port Ludlow, an original boat. We're building a 23-foot, basically lumber bateau style boat for a client in Southern Oregon. And we're building, in that same shop now, this is the 4th boat, we're building a 9-foot Grandy skiff to the original Grandy Boat Company designs. And we're building a 31-foot Italian gondola called a Batella, which is basically a cargo or personnel carrying ferry boat for a client in Southern California. So all the boats in that shop are commissioned. The students are getting an incredible range of construction experience in that class. In the contemporary program, we have 2 sections. One section of students is building a 21-foot plywood boat, a longboat, a Drascombe longboat for the National Outdoor Leadership School in Mexico on the Baja Peninsula, and a small Wee Lassie, which is a Mac McCarthy design, a small canoe, which we're strip blanking at the present time. And in the upper section, which is up the hill, our campus is separated by a bluff. Part of it's on the water, part of it's up the hill. The upper campus students are building a 28-foot bartender, which is a big power boat, big engine, plywood, 1963 design by George Calkins, and a Lake Oswego boat to a design given to us by the Center for Wooden Boats in Seattle. So quite an incredible range of boats this year.
Yeah. Is that more boats than you typically build in one year, Pete?
The number of students is up this year. We started with 53, and so obviously we have to each student has to have a range of projects to work on. So our boat numbers are up this year because our student numbers are up. And,
I see.
It is more boats than we've built in quite a number of years. The previous high, I believe, was in 2010 when we had 55 students in the class starting.
Mm-hmm. And how many of those boats are commissioned boats, Pete?
Oh, let's see. All the boats in the small craft class, so that's 5. 2 of the 4 boats in the contemporary program are commissioned, and all of the boats in the large, 2 out of 3 boats in the traditional large craft program.
Yeah.
So the 28-foot Hanson, for example, which we're building as a cruising tug, it was begun by instructor Tim Lee before he moved on to the Shipwrights Co-op in Port Townsend, now being built by Peter Bailey, the instructor, is being built. That boat is being built as a cruising tug. That boat is for sale. It has not been bought yet. And the Lake Oswego boat in the contemporary program and the Wee Lassie are both for sale.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure they'll sell. They're great boats.
Yeah, yeah. And
if you're interested out there, we'd be happy to talk to you.
Yeah, okay. Very cool. So, So Pete, the 5 instructors are. Let me see if I can get them all. Peter Bailey, Bruce, Jeff.
Bruce Blatchley, right?
Yeah.
Jeff Hammond, our senior instructor.
Yeah.
Jesse Long.
Okay, I don't think I've met Jesse.
Instructor.
Okay.
And Ben Kahn, our traditional large craft instructor.
Yeah. Okay. Very good. And And then you were saying before we started the recording that you've got a full student load for next year already. Is that right?
Yes, we have 55 students enrolled at the present time, not all 12-month program students. We are accepting a few more students into the contemporary program. We have a little more space on the shop, the way the shop is laid out this next year. And we will probably have one or two students drop out of that 55, so we'll have a waiting list. We do have a waiting list going in our, if people want to wait for a spot, we're happy to put them on the list.
Yeah, that's awesome. Congratulations, Pete.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I think our Director of Education, Pamela Roberts, deserves a great deal of the credit for that. She's been very active managing our website and walking through people on tours and working with our accreditors, the Accrediting Commission of Career Schools and Colleges, to make sure that we're placing people properly and those kinds of things. So
yeah,
she deserves a great deal of the credit for that.
Yeah. So out of all the students this year, can you give me kind of a flavor for the mix of students that you've got?
Yeah, this is an interesting class, and I think they're all interesting classes, really. People that are attracted to wooden boat building and wood technologies are usually people who have reflected on their lives and who really have made a conscious decision to move in that direction. People who are interested in handcrafts, for example, and who can work easily with hand tools and machine tools. On average, out of our 53 students who started in early October, we'll lose a couple folks who, for one reason or another, either get sick or decide that the commute's too far sometimes from Tacoma. So there's usually 3 or 4 folks who will drop out early in the program. Unfortunately, we do our best to retain them, but sometimes they seek other adventures elsewhere. A friend of mine, for example, dropped out because he wanted to spend more time sailing than he did want to do boat building. Why that happened, I don't know.
Yeah.
We usually have 3 or 4 folks who are 18 to 20 years old. We usually have about a third of the class who are in their mid-20s. We have a third of the class who are significant career changers in their mid-30s. And in the past, we've often had up to a third of the class who is retired or close to retiring and who are looking for part-time employment or employment outside of their retired specialty, the specialty that they earned their bread and butter on for the majority of their life. Over the last several years, we've slowly changed the mix of students to focus more on the folks in their 20s and 30s and the folks who are the career changers, because the Department of Education has been changing the rules and making the schools focus on vocational employment. And so we are very interested in making sure that our graduates have the right amount of training, the right type of training, so that they can walk out of our doors and go find a job in the marine trades or in marine trades or woodworking-related fields. Mm-hmm. So our mix this year is probably 3 or 4 18 to 20-year-olds, probably I would say a good 40% in their mid-20s, a good 40% in their late 20s to middle 40s, including a large number of veterans coming out of the armed forces, and a small number of retired folks who have retired, say, from a career in the armed forces or from a career in the banking industry, for example, and who are actively interested in working in marine trades or marine skills somewhere.
Mm-hmm. That's a big mix of people, isn't it?
Yeah, and it certainly makes for an interesting class. That was one of the things that I really enjoyed in my 3 years at the program as a student, was the opportunity to work alongside folks significantly younger and significantly older than me. In college, for example, or in a trade school, you're usually working with people who are much the same age as you and who are generally from similar backgrounds. Not always, but substantially similar. In the vocational school at the Northwest School of Wood and Boat Building, people come to the wood and boat skills and trades from all over the place, from people who are fishing in Alaska to guys and gals who have just come out of high school to people who worked in the building trades from Rhode Island to Canadian students to F-18 pilot, for example, a person who spent their life in the banking industry. College professors usually have a doctor in the class. Most classes have a medical professional, emergency room technicians, nurses. it just varies wildly all over the place, and everybody is united by a common love of wooden boats and a significant interest in craft and making a life for themselves that isn't the kind of life that you would spend, say, commuting back and forth to an office in. It's a common thing that we hear from students.
Yeah.
It certainly was common in my world.
Yeah.
I didn't want to commute anymore.
Right. So, Pete, I know you put in a lot of hours there and a lot of energy, and you're really fired up about it. So what's in it for you, Pete? Why do you do this?
Oh, I love the challenge. I love the people that I work with. I like the students. I'm fortunate to work with a staff that really has their heart in the school and their heart in supporting our students in teaching a skilled trade, a very complicated skilled trade. And that dedication really shows through on a daily basis. It's not just a job. It's a way of life. It's a way of seeing the world. It's a way of thinking about your place in the world. And I like to be among those kind of people, especially the creative people who are willing to take a risk and build a boat, or take a risk and build wooden objects. And for some reason, I really enjoy that, and I consider myself exceptionally fortunate to be able to work at the school for that reason.
Wow, I love that answer, Pete. That is awesome. You guys,
it hasn't, in the time that I've been at the school, I really feel strongly about that, and it hasn't changed. I think it's, from our business manager to our director of education to our instructors to our front desk staff, to the guy that keeps our tools in maintenance and the rest of it. These are really special people. They really have their heart in the work, and it centers around the students in the school.
Yeah.
I can't speak more highly than that. It's just a privilege to work there.
Yeah, and the cool thing I like about it, Pete, is that you guys are carrying on a tradition that would otherwise go away probably very easily.
Yeah, I think largely it might. There's one of the deans of the profession, one of the men who made the transition from wooden boat building as a vocation that was a common vocation maybe 100 years ago, carried it across the era of fiberglass into the world that we inhabit now, said that boat building and wooden boat building in particular is going to be carried on by the amateurs. And I think in that case, in many cases, he was right about that. There still will be a small, dedicated core of professionals, and that's where we are. We employ those professionals. They're our instructors and our administrators, and they teach the professionals of the next generation. And the interesting part is the next generation is not an age-specific thing. It is more of a vocational interest. The next generation can be an 18-year-old person coming out of high school, or it can be somebody that's 70 years old that has had a long and varied set of careers in different fields and has come to the school to learn another career. We have a student like that this year who is as active as any 18-year-old in the shop and intends fully to get out and work vocationally, set up his own boatyard down in the Columbia when he graduates, and work on fixing and building boats, and fully capable of doing it. So it's not an age-related thing, it's an interest-related thing. It's more of a community, I think, is the best way to describe it.
Yeah, very cool. So, Pete, was it last summer that some of your boats were used to recreate a trip down the Grand Canyon?
Yes, that's an interesting story. I'll try to keep that as short as I can, knowing you're probably running close to time, but we were very fortunate in the summer of 2012 to be contacted by the British Broadcasting Corporation, who was going to film a recreation of John Wesley Powell's trip through the Grand Canyon, which was completed. His first trip was completed in 1869. So we had built boats like this for an IMAX History Channel movie in the mid-1980s, probably in 83 or 84. And they contacted rivermen down in the Colorado River who pointed them at us, and we took on the task of not only building the boats, but of designing the boats based on Powell's actual words from his journals and from the men who had traveled down the river with him. And so Jeff Hammond, our senior instructor, and Ben Kahn, our traditional large craft instructor, read the books, pored over them, and over our Christmas holiday, once we had the contract in hand, designed the boats to Powell's specifications as best as we could determine. We have quite a bit of experience building Whitehauls over the years, and these two guys have a lot of experience in it. And so they went back and using their knowledge of traditional American Whitehauls, which is a very common boat in the 1800s in the United States, as common as white pickup trucks are now, designed the boats to Powell's specs and then built them. So we contracted with Nautical Timbers in Newport, Rhode Island, who felled the trees for us, so we had white oak to work from in the same style that Powell's boat builder in Chicago had to build his boats. And our students in the large craft class built two 21-foot oak-framed and oak-planked Whitehauls, while Jeff Hammond's students in the traditional small craft shop built one 16-foot Whitehall that was used by Powell himself, a model of that boat, which originally was planked in white pine, but because we couldn't get white pine quickly enough out here in the Pacific Northwest, we used larch instead, which is a similar wood, but maybe about as hard as old-growth white pine. There was a lot of concern at the time about the planking being wet and the boats being corked, and how would they survive on the river, but the boats were taken down the river in August. I believe they started on the 6th of August and ended on the 24th. I think the trip was an 18-day trip. And they tried to stop in the same places that Powell's men had stopped on the exact same day that Powell had passed that way on the river. It was an exceptionally difficult and very dangerous trip for the rivermen because the river was running fairly high. Some of the guys, most of them, in fact, had no experience in Whitehauls, which act completely differently than rubber boats do. And they were a little cautious about it. The boats proved themselves worthy several times over. They're extremely tough, resilient boats. And we told the BBC early on that they needed to think very carefully about this because Powell didn't know how rough the Colorado could be. One of the wildest rivers in the United States, if not the world. And the boats that Powell used were probably the exact wrong kind of boat to use on a river like that. Whitehauls were designed to run in a straight line at speed. They were used for cross-harbor ferries and for going out to meet incoming sailing ships to drop off the pilot. And so the boats often raced each other, and the boat was designed with a long straight keel to be rowed in straight lines as fast as possible by usually two rowers. Once in a while there was a sail, but not very often. And so you can imagine in the unbelievably violent cataracts of the Colorado that these boats wanted to run in straight lines, and the river, of course, doesn't go in a straight line. It roars and rumbles and rips over rocks and rapids and the rest of that kind of thing. And these boats took a fearful beating, and all of them survived thanks to the BBC's foresight in taking Ben Kahn, the builder of the two large craft, along with them. And Ben acted as the boatwright, and when they were having campfire sessions and recalling what Powell had done, Ben was out working on the boats, and he worked on the boats from dusk until dawn most nights, and he rowed the boats during the daytime, and he kept that voyage going throughout 18 days. And the film, which we've been privileged to see so far, has only been shown in the UK twice, on the 5th and 12th of January, and then 2 days, I think, in February of this year. And it was filmed in HD with full-up professional teams in rubber boats, big rafts. And the footage is absolutely astoundingly eye-popping footage. So we're exceptionally proud of Ben and Jeff and the students from the class of 2013 who built those three boats. And the boatmen were very positive about the experience in the boats. The person in charge, Dan Snow, who is the TV, not actor, but the sort of the host of the program who went along, said he didn't think that anything other than boats built like that would have survived being bounced off rocks and crushed against walls. There's plenty of opportunities to see this on YouTube. You'd have to look up Operation Grand Canyon with Dan Snow, and sometimes you can find the video on there, but we do have pictures on our Flickr site that we took off as screenshots and put on. And there's plenty of times where those boats were completely filled with water and submerged with only the crew's heads above water, and yet they would always come back to the surface. They would always be able to bail out, and they'd always be able to keep going down the river in them. So the classes really did a phenomenal job under Jeff and Ben's direction.
Wow, that's amazing, Pete.
We're hoping to be able to show the videos. Believe me.
Yeah, I know.
It's really incredible.
You've been working on that, haven't you? Yeah.
We'll save the spot for you, Dan, so that you can come over. And
I'd love to. That would be really fun. That would really be cool.
It's 2 1-hour videos was what they did.
Yeah, okay. Very good. Well, Pete, I appreciate you being on the podcast today, and any parting comments you'd like to make?
No, I just appreciate your support, Dan. You've been a very long-term friend of the school and supporter, enabling us to get the word out to people about the great experience we have here and being a friend of wooden boats across the United States. So thank you.
Yeah,
appreciate it.
You're very welcome, Pete. So good chatting with you, and we'll chat here for a second once we stop the recording. So thanks again, Pete.
You're welcome, Dan. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Pete, for taking the time to do the podcast. It's always fun to chat and find out what's happening at the boat school, which is some really cool stuff. And I have not been to the boat school since, I think, last July, possibly, at the Pocket Yachters Rendezvous at the boat school. So I'm going to try to get over there this month or the next, and we can hang out and have some fun, maybe do some more interviews there. So anyway, I wish you the best in the future, Pete, for you and all the students and the staff there. Okay, well, not a whole lot else to report this week. And although I have gotten some tips through my tip graphic on my site, which is really cool, I appreciate that. Helping pay for the costs of doing the podcast. If you're not in the wooden boat game, it's high time you get into the game. Lots of ways to do it. I've talked about that before, but probably one of the best ways is to go buy Wooden Boat Magazine and read that, subscribe to it, start listening to this podcast, and go to a wooden boat festival in your area. Or if there is not one in your area, fly to an area that has one and check it out. Anyway, I hope you have a great week. I'll be back in 2 weeks with episode number 130. Keep the bright side up and the barnacled side down. Wooden Boat Dan over and out. God bless.